Hearst had come to believe Todd Willingham was not guilty.
Todd Willingham's case falls into that category where there is not one iota of evidence that the fire was arson. Not one iota.
Cameron Todd Willingham had been sentenced to death for the arson murder of his 3 children. Then 12 years later, new evidence.
Taking a look at the photographs and video and testimony and fire investigation report, it became apparent that we were dealing with a fire which had gone to flashover.
Flashover, the instant ignition of all combustible material in a room.
The flashover had left natural patterns on the floor that all post-flashover fires tend to leave behind, and these had been misidentified as pour patterns, and thus the fire had been labeled an arson.
Hearst reviewed the report line by line.
All right, here's your first bit of so-called arson evidence. This was typically interpreted in the old days as a pour pattern. In other words, someone poured gasoline or some other accelerant down the hallway, out the front door, and then ignited it. The prosecutor in this case literally believed that the burn patterns on the floor were in the shape of a pentagram, like some satanic ritual. When you actually look at the burn pattern that they drew, and then you look at where the windows are, windows furnish ventilation to a fire. And all they were looking at is what we call ventilation patterns.
The original arson investigators had testified that there was evidence of a liquid accelerant on the threshold of the porch door.
A sample of wood debris from the base of the front porch was analyzed, and the results were positive for a combustible liquid accelerant-kerosene. Well, that's quite understandable because the porch also had a barbecue on it. And of course there would be charcoal lighter fluid there if there was a can of charcoal lighter fluid on the porch.
Hearst also addressed Willingham's lack of injuries.
Why were Todd Willingham's feet not burned? And the answer to that question is quite simple. Because if no accelerant was poured on the floor would have been relatively cool until shortly after flashover occurred in the bedroom. The last part of him that would have gotten any burn would have been his feet.
And Hearst concluded the original investigators had not eliminated accidental causes.
There had to be at least one electrical short in that room. And since it was surface wiring, it would have been relative child's play to simply trace it, get a step ladder, and trace it and go over it inch by inch until you locate the fault. That in and of itself is enough to toss the case out for arson.
Hearst had come to believe Todd Willingham was not guilty.
Todd Willingham's case falls into that category where there is not one iota of evidence that the fire was arson. Not one iota.
Hearst completed his report only 4 days before the scheduled execution. Nevertheless, the Texas courts and the United States Supreme Court refused to delay the execution.
It was just, the train had left the station and nobody was going to stop it.
And Texas Governor Rick Perry would not use his authority to delay the execution.
In Texas, you do not get elected by granting stays of execution to people like Cameron Todd Willingham. You do not show any kind of mercy to criminals. You are hard on criminals, and that gets you elected in this state.
At 6 o'clock, Cameron Todd Willingham was told that his time was up.
When he was asked by the warden if he had anything to say, then he went into the statement that he said he had been wrongly convicted and that he was innocent.
Willingham's wife, Stacy, was watching from the witness room. She had testified against him.
She walked up to the window and he said, "You bitch." Not only did he tell his wife that he hoped she would rot in hell. He said he hoped that she would rot in hell. I had heard a lot of things over covering hundreds of these executions in Texas over the years. I'd never run into that. Then the drugs began to be administered, and within a few moments he was unconscious, and then a few moments later was pronounced dead.
They told us that we could go to the funeral home when the state turned his body over to the funeral home and touch him while he was still warm. So that's what we did.